His name was Carl Montefiore. He was a tall, angular guy. I think handsome, with a smug look. Even if he didn't have my wife, I'd probably want to beat the shit out of him. But at that moment, his look wasn't smug. It was dazed. When I walked into his office, he thought he was meeting with a potential client of his software firm, not face-to-face with his horny husband. He stood up to greet me with a welcoming smile, and I could see that he didn't even remember my face, even though we had met several times. "Good morning, Mr. Reagan, isn't it? Nice to meet you. Please have a seat." His handshake was firm and confident, which is the sign of an experienced salesman. I sat and stared at him coldly for a few moments, then spoke. "Actually, I'm not Reagan, Carl. I'm Proctor. David Proctor is Lauren's husband? Lauren Proctor from your HR department, the one you've been sleeping with for a couple months now?" His face became very tense, and he just looked at me without saying anything. I pulled a stack of photos out of an envelope and tossed them in front of him. "This is you and her at the Best Western Kenwood Inn on Montgomery Road. Room 128, right in the back of the building. You guys seem to like the same room every time." There's been silence. "Who pays for the room, Carl? You or my adorable whore of a wife?" I knew the answer, but I wanted to hear his answer. "I pay," he said finally, his eyes looking past me to the far wall. "I have a arrangement with the manager. We handle their accounting software and backups." There was silence again. I was in no hurry to get anywhere. I was angry, of course, mad as hell. But I'd been like this for almost 5 weeks now, so I wasn't in any hurry to go anywhere. "Okay," he said finally. "So you know what do you want?" He sort of looked older, like the energy had gone out of him. "What do you want from me?" "In my car, Carl, there's a large manila envelope addressed to your wife's office. I'm going to stop by the FedEx office as soon as I leave here, unless I get more help from you during this visit." His face went pale, but he managed not to jump up from his chair. I marveled amusedly at his equanimity. It would be very bad if Emily found out about this." He looked at me. "What do you want me to do?" I handed him a piece of paper. "Read it again. Then call my wife right now and talk to her. You can change the wording, change whatever fucking love name you use with her, whatever. Make it sound natural, like she expects it from you. But read it the way I wrote it." He read it carefully, then looked up. "I don't know, Lore. Whether she'll go for it." I laughed. "Carl, I've heard audio recordings of 6 of your little encounters with my wife. You guys were doing much weirder things." He actually blushed when I said I'd heard them. He thought a little longer, frowning. And then he said, "And if I do this, what then?" I shrugged. "Then you'll be rid of me. And whatever you and Lauren do after today, I don't give a shit." "And the FedEx envelope for my wife?" I shrugged again. "I'll throw it away." "Do I have your word on that, Mr. Proctor?" I leaned forward. "You can hardly bargain, Carl. But yes, you have my word." He read my script again, then he looked at me again, and when I didn't move, he sighed and picked up the phone. "Me and Lauren? Pretty much the same old story. No need to stretch it. We met when she was in college and I had my first job. It was a blind date. She was good friends with my cousin Marie, who thought we'd really hit it off, and we did. Our courtship was totally typical, but that doesn't mean it wasn't amazing. I fell in love with Lauren by about the 5th date, and she seemed to treat me the same way. The sex was a little vanilla at first, a little tentative, but we really opened up to each other, and it got better and better. We were married about 14 months later. Marie was her maid of honor, and my brother Bobby was my best man. We had Tina almost immediately, an unplanned but wonderful event. She's a tennis star, a great student, and a talented artist. A fantastic, energetic, sweet girl, and I adore her. Lauren and I have always said we only have one, but we have the best baby ever. I would say Lauren and I had a great marriage and a great life. In fact, I used to say that all the time when someone asked how we were doing. Sometimes she would flirt a little with our friends at parties, but then she would always reassure me. In fact, our lovemaking was never better than after we were with other people, and she was confirming for herself how attractive she was to men. I'd never doubted Lauren's devotion to me, not once in 19 years. No obvious signs, no uncertain looks or sudden rush home to shower, no late nights at work, no hickeys or scratches on her body. Nothing. We had sex no more and no less. We didn't have better or worse sex. I would never know. Oh, I think, looking back, Lauren may have been a little happier that spring, a little more lively and fun, but it wasn't much, and I never would have noticed if I hadn't found out about her affair. Tina found out about it. It was one of the worst moments, even though it was bad. A Saturday afternoon in early April during my senior year, I was helping my brother rearrange furniture, and Tina was supposed to leave for a day at a tennis tournament. But the day before, a downpour flooded the courts, and the tournament was canceled. Tina's teammate Avery dropped her back at the house around 11 a.m., hours before she was expected home. Tina dropped her bag, pulled a Diet Coke out of the fridge, and reached for the phone to call a friend about the party that night. She pressed the speaker button, not realizing her mom was on the phone, and heard a male voice say, "Your beautiful figure again." A stunned Tina quickly turned the phone off. After a minute or two, she quietly crept down the hallway and peeked into the master bedroom. Lauren was lying on the bed, wearing only her panties. She was holding her cell phone in her hands. Tina heard her say, "Oh yeah, I can't wait either. Can we do Monday this week, or do I have to wait until Wednesday to get you?" Stepping away from the door, Tina retreated to the kitchen, grabbed her tennis bag, and walked out of the house. She walked over to the playground at the nearby elementary school and sat there for 2 hours crying. Then she picked herself up, wiped her face, and went home. I didn't hear anything about it for almost 2 weeks. All I knew was that Tina was withdrawn and moody. I guess like a typical teenager, except she was always so sunny and cheerful. I asked Lauren if anything was going on, and she was as puzzled as I was. When Tina finally broke down and told me, it was on the way back from sectionals. She had played much worse than usual and lost to a girl from Lockland High School whom she had beaten 4 times in the last 2 years, and I could tell she wasn't herself. So I made a stop at Starbucks, bought us some food, and parked the car in the big parking lot of the nearby Walmarts. And I said, "Baby, tell me what's going on." She shrugged her shoulders. "Nothing. I was playing lousy, that's all." I reached out and touched her shoulder. "Tina, you know I don't care. It's just one tennis match. But you haven't been happy for a couple of weeks. Please talk to me. Talk to your silly old dad who loves you." Then I took a wait-and-see attitude. Over the years, I learned that Tina could never keep quiet. She was just staring out the window, unmoving, and suddenly I saw tears on her cheeks. Without turning her head, she said, "Daddy, Mom is cheating on you." "What kind of cheating?" I was ready to yell at her that this isn't funny. This is crazy. Has she lost her mind? Instead, I held back. I bit my tongue and waited. And she told me the whole story, coming home early, what she heard and what she saw. Of course, it was impossible to believe it. I believed what Tina was saying, but I couldn't believe what it meant, what it was supposed to mean. We cried together for a while, and then I asked her to keep the secret while I figured it out a bit. So Tina and I made a sort of pact, a little deal to hide all of our suspicions and our feelings from Lauren. It actually brought us closer together, even though we've always had a great relationship. And I did what a poor sucker's husband, or wife, I guess, always does in these situations. I spent a few thousand on a private investigator. 3 weeks later, I got the report, pictures and audio. That Thursday, I went to work, locked the door, turned off the ringer on my phone, and dealt with it. I read it all and listened to it all. I cried and cussed. I took off my shoe and threw it across the room, knocking a framed diploma off the wall. I pounded my fist on the table. I paced the room and sobbed. I sat at the desk and stared stupidly out the window. When I calmed down around 1:30, I went to the diner for a late lunch. After a Reuben sandwich and 2 cups of coffee, I started making some plans. We may have had a perfectly ordinary family life, but it still meant something to me. I had been passionately in love with Lauren for almost 20 years, and I never had any reason to doubt that I was very lucky to have her marry me. We loved talking and just being together. We were friends, we valued the same things and wanted the same things out of life. I would say we were the happiest couple in the strongest marriage I have ever known. I guess we weren't, huh? As soon as I saw the report, I knew the marriage was over. I might have been able to get over a brief affair, but she and Carl Montefiore enjoyed each other's company for weeks, with great pleasure on both sides, from everything I've seen, and they were close. They were long past the damn romantic stage. They'd played games. She'd dressed up in sexy lingerie for him. They'd used toys. They'd fooled around with blindfolds and handcuffs. Lots of things much wilder than anything that went on in our bedroom. So one day I picked Tina up early from school and we went out to lunch, just the two of us. I spared her all the details, but told her it was a real affair and that I was going to leave her mom. Tina was angry and unhappy. She wanted to go straight home and break up with Lauren, but I calmed her down. Look, honey, you know your mom loves you. She adores you. She didn't do this to you, she did it to me. But she betrayed me, not you. And I have to deal with that. Do you think you can win an Oscar for a few more weeks? Be a regular daughter. Don't act out of the ordinary until school is out? She nodded miserably. I think I am, Daddy. I mean, if you want me to. It's just... She started sobbing again. It's just... How could she done with you? With us? You're so beautiful with her and... Her voice turned into a wail, and I walked over to her side of the couch and hugged her while she cried. In the end, Tina promised to play the loving daughter until graduation. 3 days later, she was leaving for a 10-week tennis camp for boys and girls in Colorado. And then, after a week at home, she would go to USC. I let her know I was going to end the marriage after she left for the summer, and then I'm going to take a vacation and travel. Honey, how about I come to Denver for a few days and visit you? She exhaled, wiped her eyes, tried to smile, and said, Yes, Daddy, that would be great. I'd sorted out all the routine shit beforehand. Found an apartment, made financial arrangements with credit cards and our current account, got a vacation at work so I could fly out to the West Coast. I was going to visit my college roommate in San Francisco for a few days, then rent a car, drive through the Rocky Mountains, hang out with Tina briefly in Colorado, and then fly home. Once Lauren left for work that morning, I waited for the movers to pick up my piece of furniture and take it to my new apartment along with my clothes, computer, and other stuff. Then I went to Carl Montefiore's place and had a nice visit. I've already told you about it. I went and had lunch and dropped an envelope for Mrs. Montefiore in the FedEx box outside the courthouse. What? You thought I'd keep my word to that asshole? After he had my wife for weeks? So at 1:45, I parked the car behind the restaurant across the street from the Best Western, found a hidden vantage point, and watched. Lauren pulled in and parked right in front of number 128, walked around the main office, came back a minute or two later, put the key card under the mat outside the door to number 128, used the other one to enter, and closed the door behind her. She had her shopping bag with her, so I assumed she had brought everything Carl had asked her for in their little phone conversation. I waited for about 10 minutes. Then I went to the door, pulled a card out from under the mat, and walked in. Lauren was there. It was my wife, the woman I had loved, cherished, and been faithful to for 20 years. She was lying on the bed, wearing a very sexy black body and nothing else. She was lying on her stomach, and she was wearing a sleep mask. She couldn't see anything. I saw her tense up when she heard the door to the room open and close. Carl, God, you scared me, baby. I was just lying here and... Shh, I whispered it. I walked over to the bed and leaned over to whisper in her ear. You're a dirty little slut, aren't you? My little peach. That's what he called her on some of the recordings I'd heard, God knows why. I poured some of Carl's cologne on, so there was no reason why she didn't think I was her lover. Now I'm here, and I'm going to drive you crazy. I said it in a whisper, knowing she wouldn't be able to tell it was me. Without saying a word, I found a bag on the chair and pulled out the handcuffs. I cuffed Lauren's hands together above her head, then pulled a long rope out of my pocket. Tying one end to the handcuffs, I reached over and shoved the rest of the rope under the bed, then went to grab it from the other side, lifted it up and tied the other end to the handcuffs on the other side. Taking 2 shorter pieces of rope, I tied one end of each to one of her ankles and the other to a leg at the foot of the bed. Now she was pinned in the middle of the bed. She couldn't put her arms down, she couldn't sit up, she couldn't bring her legs together, and she couldn't roll over. "You're a very bad girl, aren't you?" I whispered. She giggled and I slapped her ass. That made her jump up and she shrieked. I didn't hit her hard, certainly not because of the anger I felt. "Oh yes, baby, I'm a very bad girl. Are you going to punish me?" She smiled, arching her bare ass over the bed and moving it a little, seducing me. Without saying a word, I took off my clothes and placed them on the chair by the door. Then I waited silently, knowing she didn't know where I was. "Carl? Babe?" She seemed excited but a little nervous. I made her wait a couple more minutes while she looked for me, or him, I guess, a few more times. Then, without warning, I started spanking her ass hard, giving her 20 alternating spanks on both cheeks. "Oh, Carl, what is... Ow. It hurts, baby. What?" When I was done, she just said, "Man, baby, that hurt. What the hell was that? Aren't you a bad little girl? A little whore? A whore who cheats on her husband?" She frowned and said, "Don't talk about him, remember?" Ignoring her, I continued, "What do you think he would say if he saw you like that, little peach? Tied to the bed? What would he say?" "Stop it, baby," Lauren whimpered. Just touch me, okay?" With a huff, she continued, "I know I'm bad, baby. Be my master and punish me." So I did. I punished her exactly as I had planned, knowing that this would be the last time I would touch her, the last time I would see her naked. Remember, this was the woman I'd had sex with for 2 decades. I knew her responses well and waited until the very last minute. "Please, Carl, please, baby. You've driven me crazy." Silence ensued. I may have overdone it a little too much with her, but I didn't care. Finally, she said in a little girl's voice, "That was great, baby. You outdid yourself today." She giggled and added, "What's gotten into you? Or should I say, what's gotten into me?" She had a dreamy smile on her face. She looked completely pleased with herself. "That was great, Carl," she said again, and when I didn't respond, she said, "Baby, Carl, where are you?" Fully dressed, I sat down on the bed next to her again. "Right here, Peach," I said in my voice, and removed the sleep mask from her face. Her eyes flew open and she smiled at me a little dazedly as they began to focus. Then she cried out, "Ooh!" One short sound, instantly cut short. I looked at her, and her face took on a frightened expression. Her eyes widened, and her lips pressed together in a frightened grimace. I had all sorts of angry words at the ready weeks of anger and misery I was ready to pour out on her, but instead I said nothing. Just watched her face as she pondered what had happened in the motel room over the previous 2 hours. Lauren went very pale. She licked her lips nervously, looking at my impassive face. "David, Oh my God. David, I don't understand what you..." "Darling, it wasn't that. It wasn't that." She couldn't finish that sentence. Perhaps that's not surprising under the circumstances. I looked at her in silence, tears streaming from the corners of her eyes. She lay there, naked if you didn't count the teddy bear on her chest, and cried, shaking her head, still looking at me but shaking her head, saying, "No, no, it can't. It can't. It can't." I stood up and looked at her, still not saying anything as her sobs got louder and louder. I then pulled out my prepaid cell phone and dialed the predetermined number. When the voice on the other end of the line said, "You witness news feed," I said. "Yeah, I'm in Western Kenwood on Montgomery Road, and in the next room, room 128, there's some kind of family argument or sex going on." "Yup, I can't tell if the lady was raped or something, but there's a lot of screaming going on." I had already called 911, but figured I would call you guys too. Without waiting for an answer, I hung up. Lauren stopped crying. She turned her head to look at me. She had this look of horror on her face. "No, baby. Please don't let them. Don't let anyone see me. Please, baby. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please, Dave." Looking her straight in the eyes, I dialed the 911 number again. "What is your emergency?" the voice asked. Yes, I'm at the Best Western Kenwood Hotel and some guy is having fun. Excuse me, a man is having sex with a woman in room 128 and the door is wide open. You can see everything. I walked by with my kids and, my God, he tied her to the bed and everything. I hung up the phone. Lauren was screaming wildly now, arching her back, trying to free herself. Please, baby, please, 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 please. You won't leave me here. I'm begging you, please. I leaned down and covered her mouth with my hand, holding her face tightly so she couldn't turn away from me. Panic froze in her eyes as she looked up at me. I held her like that for a couple minutes, just looking at her, looking at the face of the woman I'd loved for most of my conscious life. And then I let her go and walked out of the room, ignoring her desperate screams and pleas behind me. I used a pillow from the couch to swing the door open and walked out into the parking lot, going to sit on a bench near the street. About 4 minutes later, a large UOVitnedZ news van pulled into the parking lot. I waited until I saw two guys, one with a big camera, heading toward the open door of room 128, and then I crossed the street, got in my car, and drove away. It was a Saturday in mid-September, and I was driving home, the house Lauren and I lived in together. Only now I was living in an apartment downtown. Tina was in a dorm at the University of Southern California, and the house was for sale. Lauren couldn't afford the mortgage on her own. After my little adventure with Lauren breaking up our marriage, I flew to San Francisco for a vacation, saw my brother, drove through the Rocky Mountains, and had a great visit with my daughter. Then I came home and started building a new life, the life of a single guy. My lawyer started the divorce, and I avoided any contact with Lauren, except to leave a message saying I would give her until November 1st to buy my half of the house. After that, I was going to sell it. She called and emailed me for weeks, but I never responded. I didn't want to tell her anything, nor did I want to hear anything. I had a friend who was following the press coverage of my little prank. There were a couple of articles in the local paper, alas, no pictures, and a 3-day flutter, the news on the local eyewitness channel at 11:00. They filmed a little footage that could be used, a camera zooming in on the open motel door, then a partial shot of the bound woman on the bed. Unfortunately, Lauren's face was never seen, and the news station never mentioned any names, no doubt to avoid a lawsuit. Ah, well. But Mrs. Montefiore demoted her husband to janitor, and she made enough noise in the company to get Lauren fired. A rumor spread among our friends that she was the secret woman in that crazy motel room story. That was enough for me. Lauren had to take an administrative job 20 miles away at a lower salary. I knew she'd never be able to keep the house. And from what Tina told me, she was miserable and apologized all week while Tina came back before leaving for college again. Tina was still so angry that she barely spoke to her mother. I pulled into the driveway, parked, and walked into the house. Lauren had agreed to sign the divorce papers and power of attorney for the house if I came over to talk to her. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching me as I walked in. Hi, David. Lauren. She looked older, a little thinner. She hadn't been sleeping well and probably hadn't been eating well. I didn't find my heart overflowing with sympathy. Would you like some coffee? No, thanks. I got myself a glass of water and sat down. She pointed to the bar counter and said, All the papers are over there. I signed them. How long do I have before I need to find a place? Probably at least 2 to 3 months. Even if it sells instantly, it usually takes people a couple months before it closes. I'll let you know. Silence reigned. I know we're done, she said suddenly. I've been thinking about it for a long time, as you can probably imagine. I've been thinking, not to mention asking myself why I've been such a fool. I've been thinking about how I would feel if the situation were reversed, if you were having an affair behind my back. And I couldn't even imagine taking you back under any circumstances. The feeling of betrayal, the shock and humiliation, the anger at being cheated on, lied to, and treated with such contempt. She looked at me unhappy but dry-eyed. I'm just trying to say that I understand, David. Or at least I sort of understand. I won't claim to really know how you felt. If there was any chance at all, you could by any means, I don't know, find a way to give me another chance. I would do anything, give you every ounce of devotion and love in me to make up for what I've done. But I don't think that's possible." Her eyes darted to look at my face, but all she could see was a blank stare. "So, what I really wanted to say is that I'm sorry. I'm sorry I cheated on you. I'm sorry I acted like a slut. I'm sorry I disrespected all the love, devotion, and support you've given me since the day we met. I'm sure my apology means nothing to you, but you still deserve it, and I still wanted to pass it on to you." She looked at me, no doubt hoping I would say something even slightly comforting. But I didn't. I just looked at her. No nod, no aha. Just looked. "Did Tina tell you how we found out?" She nodded, her face tense with pain. "I asked her several times, and she finally answered. I feel so awful about it. Anyway, David, it was never about humiliating you or hurting you. I know I was an idiot to think I could keep it a secret, but that's what I was trying to do. At least we thought we were being very careful." She started telling me about how it started, and I raised my hand. "I don't want to hear it. I don't care how it started. I don't care why you did it, or how long it lasted, or anything like that. You wanted to tell me you were sorry. Fine, you told me. Anything else?" I knew I was a heartless bastard, and it was a little surprising that I found it so easy. She was suffering, and I found that I had absolutely no interest in comforting her, or even treating her decently. You do the offense, you do the time, and it was my marriage she destroyed. My happy life she blew into a million pieces. As I waited, a tear rolled down her cheek. "No, David, I don't think there's anything else." Without a word, I took the signed papers, turned, and walked out of the house.